Good morning and good evening, fellow doctors and colleagues. For today's Dr. Shampoo Hall Retirement Virtual Webinar, we're honored to introduce Dr. Jennifer Omelo Ozaga as our invited speaker. Dr. Jennifer Omelo Ozaga is a board-certificate ENT specialist and a member of Philippine Society of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery. She is currently doing private and charity work at several institutions in the metro, as well as holding private clinics. Dr. Jenny finished her medical education at the University of Santo Tomas Hospital from 2004 to 2009, and she completed her residency training at Philippine General Hospital from 2010 to 2013. She did underwent training abroad in two subspecialties: head and neck oncology surgery in Taiwan from 2015 to 2016 that focused on the management of benign and malignant tumors, as well as microvascular free flap surgery in Thailand from 2018 to 2019 that specialize in the reconstruction of defects after surgery of the primary tumor to restore form and function. Today, Dr. Jennifer Odega's presenting topics is three workhorses for microvascular reconstruction in head and neck surgery. Please give a round of applause to welcome Dr. Jennifer Omeno Odega.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Good day. I am Dr. Jennifer Alzaga from the Philippine General Hospital, and I have the privilege of lecturing today on microvascular flaps in head and neck reconstruction. This is in commemoration of the retirement of our dear Professor Sheng Po, who was my mentor during my head and neck fellowship in Taiwan in 2015. I have to mention my work partner, Dr. Ana Lor Ignacio, with whom I perform microvascular surgeries with. I believe that our teamwork is part of the reason why we have good results with our flaps. We have been performing microvascular surgeries since we returned in 2019 after our training. This lecture will focus on the three mostly used free flaps in head and neck reconstruction, mainly the radial forearm flap, anterolateral thigh flap or ALT, and the fibula flap. We will go through the pertinent anatomy of each, its application, the advantages and disadvantages, and several pointers that Dr. Ignacio and I have accumulated as we went through all our cases. In reconstructive surgery, we have the ladder and elevator concepts. The reconstructive ladder is more of a step-by-step framework for deciding on the type of reconstruction, starting from the simplest, going up to the more complex types. Whereas the reconstructive elevator is more flexible and allows the surgeon to move up and choose the more complex reconstruction if that is what is appropriate for the case. These are the criteria for a flap to be considered ideal. Very important is versatility in design, allowing the inclusion in the harvest of either skin, muscle, or bone, a long pedicle to allow anastomosis to the appropriate vessels, and feasibility of the tumor extirpation and flap harvest being performed simultaneously to allow shorter operative time. For this lecture, as previously mentioned, I will be focusing on these three main flaps used in reconstructing head and neck defects. Starting with the anatomy of the radial forearm flap, vessels with a diameter of more than 1 millimeter are preferred because of a lesser risk for thrombosis, and the radial artery has a very adequate vessel diameter as well as pedicle length. It is important to perform your Allen's test preoperatively to ensure that the ulnar artery can adequately supply the hand after harvest, since there are around 12% having no connection between the superficial and deep palmar arch, and you want to avoid having any catastrophic complications. Venous anastomosis can be via two options, the cephalic vein or the vena comitatus. We prefer the cephalic vein as this has a bigger diameter, but if absent or not working, then we use the vena comitatus. If the veins are small, then we anastomose two veins to ensure good venous drainage. The majority of the perforators to the flap are located at the distal third of the arm and decreases as you move more proximal, and this is why we situate the flap more distally. The bigger the skin paddle, the greater the donor morbidity due to greater disruption of the lymphatic drainage. And so we try to keep the flap within the average dimension of 6 by 12 centimeters. With radial forearm flaps, you more often than not need a split thickness skin graft for the donor side. To ensure better take of the STSG, preservation of the paratenon during harvest is crucial. Before the tourniquet is activated, we identify and mark the cephalic vein and radial artery, and if the palmaris longus tendon will be included for lip cases, we mark that as well to guide us during the harvest. Next is the ALT. The arterial supply for the ALT is mainly from the descending branch of the lateral circumflex femoral artery. The challenge with the ALT is that unlike the radial forearm flap, its blood supply has more variations and inconsistency, such that the perforators may arise from the transverse cervical branch or profunda femoris artery. Venous drainage is from the vena comitatus with an acceptable diameter. For our free flaps, Dr. Ignacio and I usually do an end-to-side anastomosis, meaning we attach the flaps veins to the IJV to decrease the risk of clotting rather than doing an end-to-end anastomosis. Important landmarks for the harvest of the ALT are the axis and the lateral aspect of the patella. A line is drawn between the 2 points and the midpoint is marked, and a 6 centimeter circle is drawn. Most perforators to the skin are located in the distal posterior quadrant of the circle. The ALT is very useful because of its versatility. For defects that need bulk, you can include muscle in the flap. For defects that need a thinner but big flap, you can harvest the ALT as a fasciocutaneous flap by identifying and dissecting the perforators, leaving behind the vastus muscles. You can harvest also the fascia lata with the flap to use as a dynamic and static sling when reconstructing the defects. In addition, it allows harvest of a large flap while still allowing primary closure and minimal donor complications. However, the habitus of the patient does have an effect, such that even though textbooks state that the maximum flap width is 9 centimeters, that will allow primary closure. If, for example, the patient is obese, there are a lot of subcutaneous fat, you may have difficulty closing the donor side primarily. Moving on to the fibula, its blood supply is via both a dominant, nutrient, endosteal, and minor periosteal branches from the peroneal artery. Pedicle length varies depending on the amount of bone resected. Longer fibula would mean a longer pedicle, and if less bone is also required for the reconstruction, then more pedicle length is available for use. Venous drainage, similar to the ALT, is by the vena comitatus. Important to remember, in order to maintain good vascularity to the bone segments, are by minimizing the number of osteotomies, avoiding excessive screw placement per segment, and avoiding overzealous stripping of the periosteum. During harvest, 6 centimeters measured from the head of the fibula and from the lateral malleolus, and these are not included so as to keep the stability of the knee and the ankle. The remaining fibula is the maximum bone length that can be used for reconstruction. In textbooks, they state the maximum bone length is 30 centimeters, but in a local study done, the average maximum length among Filipinos is just 21.5 centimeters. Although this is within the 16 to 20 centimeter length, considered as acceptable for reconstruction, if you have a larger defect and your patient is smaller in height, you have to keep in mind that that means you may have less maximum bone length available. A skin paddle can be included in the harvest, and Dr. Ignacio and I always do this to allow post-operative flap monitoring. Let us move on to the application of these flaps. For radial forearm flaps, it does not have substantial subcutaneous fat nor muscle, but because of this, it is very pliable and is thus a good flap for reconstructing soft tissue defects that do not require bulk. For example, partial glucectomy cases not involving the base of tongue, using the radial forearm allows better speech post-operatively because of its pliability. It is also useful for reconstructing soft palate defects when combined with the superiorly based pharyngeal flap, as this decreases the patient's hypernasal speech and nasal regurgitation after surgery. The radial forearm flap is also a good choice for reconstructing lip defects, and for these cases, we include the palmaris longus tendon, using it as a dynamic sling, giving the patient improved oral competence and speech post-op. Here are just a few of the cases that we have done. This is a tongue SCCA where a radial forearm flap was used, and at 3 months, the flap has already mucosalized and looks very similar to the remaining tongue. It is also a good flap for reconstructing the floor of mouth and for buccal cases that only have intraoral defects. The following are lip defects where the palmaris longus tendon was included in the flap and sutured to the modulus, acting as a dynamic sling. So far, our patients have less drooling post-op and can use a straw effectively. Preoperatively, aside from performing the Allen's test, for lip defects, it is important to check if the patient has a palmaris longus tendon, as this can be absent in 15 to 25% of cases. For these, you can alternatively use the flexor carpi regialis tendon. Dr. Ignacio and I have done several soft palate defects using the radial forearm flap combined with the superiorly based pharyngeal flap to allow suspension of the posterior portion of the radial forearm. This flap is ideal for reconstructing these defects due to its pliability and its long pedicle, allowing the vessels to reach the neck without any tension. When reconstructing these soft palate defects, we place ports on either side of the flap to allow the patient to still breathe comfortably through the nose. So far, our patients have good intelligible speech and no to minimal nasal regurgitation during feeding. The ALT flap is appropriate for flaps that need more bulk, such as hemiglossectomy cases involving the base of tongue, through and through buccal defects, and maxillectomy defects. When part of the base of the tongue is included in the excision for tongue cases, bulk is needed to allow better swallowing post-op, and the ALT flap is a good choice for this. Buccal defects that have both intraoral and extraoral components can be reconstructed with a fasciocutaneous ALT that will be folded over itself. Larger soft palate defects, such as this case, can be reconstructed with a fasciocutaneous ALT, and it is still combined with the superiorly based pharyngeal flap. Post-op results are quite comparable with the radial forearm flap. We have done a few maxillectomy cases reconstructed with an ALT, and since bulk is required, muscle is included in the flap. The flap can be designed to have the skin component cover the nasal and the intraoral defect. Benefits of reconstructing maxillectomy cases with the flap are: 1, having better cosmetic appearance, it is less sunken and contracted even after radiotherapy, better speech and feeding, and there is no need for an obturator. The ALT is also useful for any reconstruction needing bulk or a large soft tissue coverage. The fibula is primarily used for reconstructing mandibular defects, but may also be used for reconstructing maxillectomy defects not requiring bulk, since the skin paddle of the fibula does not have as much muscle as the ALT. The fibula is very useful for reconstructing mandibular defects because multiple osteotomies can be done, allowing the fibula to follow the mandible's contour. A skin paddle may be included with the bone for mucosal defects and for monitoring. Moving on to the next part of the lecture. So we've actually mentioned quite a few of the advantages and disadvantages of these flaps. The advantages of the radial forearm flap are that its anatomy is quite consistent and its harvest is easy. So far, we've encountered only one case with an anatomic anomaly wherein the cephalic vein was hypoplastic. Tendon, as mentioned, can be included for lip defects. However, we've never harvested bone for this flap since it increases the donor site morbidity. Its pedicle length is long, and this is an advantage, and its vessels have a large diameter. However, it has higher donor site morbidity, and STSG is almost always required. The ALT's advantages are that you can include muscle or fascia also has a substantial pedicle length and large vessel diameter. And even if you harvest a large amount of skin or muscle, there is only minimal to moderate donor site morbidity, such as some numbness over the skin, and the donor site scar is less conspicuous. However, unlike the radial forearm flap, it has more anatomic variations and color mismatch. The perforators of the ALT, 90% come from the descending branch of the lateral circumflex artery, but some percentage may originate from the transverse circumflex or the profunda femoris artery. Because of the higher incidence of atomic variations, this requires the surgeon to adjust and pivot more during the harvest compared to when harvesting the radial forearm flap. The fibula harvest, for patients with less muscular legs, the harvest is relatively easy. Similar to the radial forearm flap, it rarely has anatomic anomalies and the vessel's caliber is large. Donor site morbidity compared to the other bone flaps is less. The following section comprises knowledge that Dr. Ignacio and I have accumulated through the years of performing cases since 2019. Before the surgery, it is important to ask about the patient's comorbidities. The vessels of those with diabetes and smoking history are less pliable and have thicker, harder walls. We avoid harvesting on a donor site with previous trauma or surgery done. We also started inquiring always if the patient is a keloid former after having a patient radial forearm case who had severe contraction of the donor site due to keloids. The patient then had lymphedema of the arm and limited finger movement, but was managed with rehab, and eventually the edema resolved and hand strength and mobility returned. For radial forearm flap, as previously mentioned, always perform Allen's test, and we instruct avoiding any IV insertion or blood extraction in the donor arm to avoid trauma to the vessels. For the ALT and fibula, during our training, we would use the Doppler to identify the location of the perforators prior to bringing the patient to the operative theater. But as we went along with our practice, we stopped using the Doppler since more often than not, the perforators are located in a different area after opening the skin. And so we just adjust our flap design accordingly. For fibula, we always request for CT angiography to check if the peroneal artery is patent or hypoplastic, or if the patient has the condition peroneal magna, wherein the leg's mean blood supply is from the peroneal artery because of hypoplastic anterior and posterior tibial arteries. Ischemic time is the moment you ligate the pedicle to the time anastomosis is done and reperfusion is established. In textbooks, it is stated that up to 6 hours ischemic time is acceptable. But from our experience, we have noticed that it is best to keep the ischemic time at 4 hours or below. We had a few cases that reached 5 hours, and the bleeding from the flap after release of the vascular clamps was present, but not as good compared to those whose ischemic time was kept at 4 hours and below. And so we've established that for our flaps, we keep the harvest of the flap at 1 hour or less, flap setting before anastomosis at 2 hours or less, and even if flap setting is not yet done, once we have reached the 2-hour mark, we shift to doing the anastomosis, and this part is also kept around 1 hour, so making a total of 4 hours. The patient's blood pressure is returned to baseline once we are nearing the end of the anastomosis to allow better blood flow into the flap. Cases where the diastolic drops to below 100, the bleeding from the flap becomes less brisk, and we prefer, therefore, to keep it at least above 100. And lastly, for the intraoperative tips, we check the flap regularly even while at the OR, because problems in the arterial anastomosis can be faster identified compared to venous anastomosis problems, which usually occur a few days after. We do this so that we can readily identify absence of bleeding from the flap, and if it occurs, even if the neck is already closed, we reopen the neck and do that re-anastomosis. We are nearing the end of my lecture. For post-operative care, the first 24 hours is the most crucial, as this is the time wherein problems mostly occur, such as expanding hematoma, clotting in the arterial anastomosis, and such. To ensure that we can readily return the patient back to the operative theater, the patient is kept on NPO and we coordinate with the anesthesiologist that we will be doing the delayed extubation. Head pillows are also placed to prevent excessive head movement that may cause problems to our anastomosis. We monitor the patient's hydration, hemoglobin, and hematocrit, keep a moderate hemodilution. Our residents, who are a huge part of our flap success, perform diligent and meticulous monitoring of our flaps via pricking and palpation. Monitoring is done hourly for the first 48 hours, and if no problems, frequency is then decreased to every 2 hours, and so on and so forth. Open dressing is done because we had a case before that gauze was covering the neck and expanding hematoma was not identified early, causing strangulation to the flap pedicle. Vasopressors, antifibrinolytics, and anticoagulants, as much as possible, we avoid giving these to our patients. But of course, if the situation calls for it, then we administer them, but watch out for its possible complications. Ideally, ICU is advised, but especially for our charity cases, due to the number of patients in our government hospital, there is no available ICU bed and patients are monitored at the ward instead. And this is another reason for our early monitoring. Remember to use the simplest technique that will achieve form and function, but do not be afraid to use a more complex reconstructive option. And important to remember, not everything needs a free flap. This ends my lecture, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer, for a very comprehensive talk about the three common free flaps that used in head and neck reconstruction. And now we open up to the floor for discussions. Is there any questions or discussions?
Jenny, are you online now?
Yes, Professor. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Really nice to see you.
Morning.
What a wonderful
Morning.
talk. Based
Thank
on
you,
your
sir.
clinical expertise now.
Thank you, Professor. Nice seeing you, Professor.
Yeah, very good experience, especially you based on your patients and have some good results, and also know how to avoid some of the difficulties and complications, and then try to find the difference among different different people. So I think that's good. That means you are really become an expert in doing the microvascular reconstruction. Yeah,
Oh,
congratulations.
not yet expert, Professor. But we are doing a lot of cases since we have a lot of hospitals that we do both charity and private, and we've accumulated all these knowledge from these cases. But not yet an expert, Professor. Thank you.
You're an expert because I just had the IFOS, 2026 Istanbul IFOS planning meeting, and I'm responsible for suggesting speakers from Asia. We have 5 continents, and then we have 5 people from different continents to compose of to suggest speakers from our region. So there are around 30 panels, and one of them is reconstruction. And I actually suggest your name to speak in the IFOS. So I think you will get invitation probably some weeks after. Yeah, so I think your lecture is just wonderful. From Philippines, and people in the whole world would really love to hear a microvascular surgeon, but also head and neck surgeon, and so doing not only the resection but also the reconstruction. So congratulations, and especially I love your conclusions. One of the conclusions: don't ever forget, free flap is not everything. So
Yes.
sometimes you have to consider the local prop. Yeah,
Yes.
and yeah, so I'm very happy to hear. That means although you are an expert of microvascular reconstruction, but you never forget about what you could have with local props. I think that's very important. Yeah. So, well,
Yes.
congratulations. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank- I think
Yeah.
yes. Thank you, Professor. Actually, I mentioned my work partner, Dr. Ignacio, because part of the success is because we have good teamwork. So I
Yes.
think that's also something that should be remembered by other surgeons, that it's good to have a work partner because it really helps to make the operative time shorter. Someone
Yeah.
can catch if you forget something or you're doing something wrong. So it's a good check and balance to have a work partner.
Yeah. And we actually, some weeks ago, I think both in Taiwan and in Korea, we actually had some discussion among, it's good to have a combined team. That means ENT and the prostate reconstructive surgeon working together, or to have a team thoroughly the free flap also by ENT doctors. And I think here we have, I don't really know your partner. Is she a prostate reconstructive surgeon or a ENT surgeon as well?
She's like me, Professor, ENT, head and neck, and microvascular.
Yeah, very good. So that means, it's always to have good to have a team, even by two ENT surgeons. One work as a resection surgeon and one work as a reconstructive surgeon. And will you study surgery at the same time? I mean, the resection and the reconstruction all at the same time, or
Yes.
you do it at the same time?
Most of the time, Professor, we have another head and neck who does the extirpation. And
Okay.
then Dr. Ignacio and I are simultaneously doing the harvest of the flap. But we've had cases wherein Dr. Ignacio will be doing the extirpation, or I will do the extirpation, and then the other will do the harvest. And then we just work together during the anastomosis.
Yeah, very good. So it's really a teamwork.
Yes,
Yeah,
Professor.
it's really a teamwork, which might not be that easy in some of the settings,
Yes.
some of the different hospitals. I think you have a very good coordination and work very closely with your colleagues and really form a good team to facilitate the procedures. Yeah, so congratulations. Is there any question or comments from the floor? Well, if isn't, then Peter, do you also have, because I think you met Jennifer when you were a resident. Do you have any comments or any questions, Peter?
Because we don't do our own free flaps, so it's always very fascinating to listen to our ENT specialists who do their own free flaps, because usually for the primary tumor in the neck, it usually costs a lot of time, and after that you need to do another maybe 6 or 8 hours of free flap. Is very very tiring. So I admire your work, and also thank you for your very wonderful talk.
Thank you, Peter. It was nice hearing from you again. You were a first-year resident and I was a fellow, I remember. How time flies.
Yeah. So go back and do the rope jumping in SKH.
Okay. I'll plan that, Professor.
All right. All right. And it seems to me that even in now in Taiwan or Korea, many ENT surgeons could do the free microvascular free flap reconstruction. However, I think that still requires a team. That means a resection, a surgeon just do the exploitation of the tumor, and then the other surgeon will do the microvascular free flap. There is very few surgeons would do the two parts, to the resection and the reconstruction, all by himself or by one surgeon. And I think that might be just too tired for.
Yes, Professor. Very tiring to do both. I want to mention also, Professor, it's very important in our success also are the residents who does the monitoring after. Very huge part of success of our flaps, because they are the one who detect at immediately any problem, and so that's why we can salvage the flap if there is any problem.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, because when I was resident, we start to have the free flap, combined free flap surgery with the prostate reconstructive surgeon in Chang'an Memorial Hospital, and so it's the ENT's residents' responsibility to check the free flap every day, and also sometimes to rescue the free flap. And
Yes.
I have some experience of rescuing the free flap, so that's really, so I think all the ENT residents should know, how to check the free flap, and how to manage the complications, especially to diagnose for example, the arterial thrombosis or the venous thrombosis, and when to go in, and I think that's very important. And you also mentioned that in your lecture, which is very good. So although your lecture is very short, but I think it really covers all the important aspects of the microvascular reconstruction. So, well, very good, very
Thank you,
precise, and very, very smart. Yep.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. And so you still have a convention today in Philippines? No?
No, Professor. Last day was yesterday.
Oh, okay. And then have a good day. And thank you for your talk again. Yep.
Thank you again, Professor. Nice
Yeah,
seeing
and
you.
let me know when when you go back to Taiwan, we'll have dinner together. All right?
Okay, Professor. I will message you. Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah, and say hello to your dad.
Yes, I thank you, Professor.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, Jenny, for a wonderful lecture. And then we are going to have, Professor Petrobut Vatanasep. He is the current national president. That's for next week. And then Reen Lehman from Holland, and from Dutch. He is a Dutch. And then in December 17th, quality of care in head and neck oncology surgery, and Professor Kwang Yong Kim. And so that would be at the end of this lecture. So thank you again for, joining this my retirement webinar, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye bye.